Aloha, 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 beautiful soul. Welcome at Wednesday Wee. Oh, there's so much I want to tell. What matters, what really matters, in such a way that you feel like, oh, okay, now I'm getting it. So I want to speak a little bit more about Ho'oponopono and its a way of looking at life. Ho'oponopono, the way that I have been taught, is not so much about forgiveness. It is much more about taking 100% responsibility, because the outside world is always a reflection of the inside world. And I am quite sure that you have been in circumstances that you were, for example, with other people, and there was a situation happening in front of you, and you saw that situation from a certain point of view, and one of the other people was looking at that situation, that same situation, from a totally different point of view. Well, what is coloring the way that we look at things in general is our subconscious. So like when I have my boyfriend is really like, I look at him, I see him, my perspective of him is that he's quite a healed person. And me, I can still easily like roll back, slide back into my unhealed personality. So when there's a situation happening in front of us, our reaction is completely different. And each time, again and again, I look at him and I'm like, okay, that's totally different way of looking at life and of that situation than the way that I look at it. Doesn't mean he's bigger, he's better, of course he's amazing. But that doesn't mean that I need to compare myself with him. It is just that so many times I'm in awe of the fact that there's a different way of looking at a situation than that I do. So in my subconscious, there are still quite some memories that are playing out. Now, the core of those memories have to do with trust, have to do with self-esteem, have to do with appreciation of me as a being, self-love, and the fact that you are watching. Those are probably also things that are working out in your life. And what happens is like our subconscious is in direct reaction to our conscious. And our conscious reacts on what is in our subconscious. So when, for example, in my case, I have issues, I had issues, and I still have some issues, it's not totally resolved, with trusting people. And it has to do with the old memory of me, a lot of memories that accumulated, but the oldest one that I've touched on is a 2-year-old being put on a diet. And this 2-year-old is inside of me, has memories. Yeah, and me in general, I speak about my inner children and not about the subconscious, although it is the same. But the subconscious to me is too wide, and an inner child is more tangible. But that energy of that 2-year-old that was put on a diet and decided there's no way I will be trusting other people, because I loved eating, and then the people around me that I should have been able to trust were putting me on a diet and were reframing me from food. But not only that, it was my mother and the doctor. It was my mother and the doctor who decided that I should be put on a diet. So my mother in this case, because the doctor I had no business with, but my mother in this case was the person I could not trust. then my father would back up my mother instead of backing me up, which for me as a child was of course very important, that I would be heard and would be seen for the cravings and the hurt and the pain I was going through because of the lack of food. So my father was not trustworthy. Well, my brother and my sister, of course, had nothing to do with it. I didn't turn to them probably, but if I did, they were not the one who were able to solve that situation. But most importantly, I also could not trust my body. Because my body all the time was screaming for food, while my head was by that time very aware there was no food coming. So there is like, on such a lot of different levels, there has been an accumulation of these memories around trust. So I'm talking about this with you to give you an idea how that works, because at that moment, of course, I did not have the rationale, I did not have the mind, I did not have the capacity to really understand what was going on. I only knew I was deprived of food. So in my subconscious, all these different aspects were taking place, and all kind of outside experiences were accumulating on that memory of trust. And if I would have gone in therapy, and believe me, there are therapists that tried, if I would have gone directly to that memory of trust, or the lack of trust on so many levels, my survival systems that I have put in place to make sure that this memory would not be touched, because that memory was too big for me to handle. So I've put all kinds of structures and systems into place to make sure that this memory was being kept safe, would not be touched, would not be entered, would not be triggered, would not be touched upon. In no way, it was so important for me as a child, as a 2-year-old, not being conscious of what is happening. It was very important for me to make sure that I tucked away that memory as deep as possible. But what does happen is that any time, which like trust is a big thing, no? So it happens all the time, especially up until the moment that I was waking up to, okay, I can direct my life in a different way. But up till that point, that memory was triggered all the time, or at least the layers that I've put around it were triggered all the time. And that are the survival mechanisms. So the layer that I have around that ball, that memory ball of trust, those layers are charged energy. And anything that is coming in the direction of that layer of charged energy will make sure that my alarm systems, my survival systems, are immediately put into place. So I put on all my guards on my heart. No one's entering my heart. I'm talking about like a few years ago. I would be spreading confusion. I would be making sure my head, my survival systems, that I would be pleasing. I would suffer from overwhelm. There would be all these mechanisms that I would put into place to make sure that other people would not come close to that memory. And I'm very specific all the time saying memory. So some people, they call it trauma, other people call it wounds, or you may have different words for it. But in Ho'oponopono, we are not going to extra traumatize you on this, no? So we are using the word memory because it is quite neutral. And every time anything is coming close to that charged energy protecting my memory, my survival systems are popping up. So now, for example, I am building my business. There's procrastination, there's imposter syndrome, there's delaying things, there is like, I am not good enough to do this kind of job. Who am I to talk about this? There are all these thought patterns that are very easily triggered that I fall into to keep me safe, because underneath there is that memory that is playing out. So the conscious, or at least the survival part of the mind, is all the time protecting something deeper within. And with Ho'oponopono, we are not taking care that much of the mind. We do not go to the survival systems as such, but we have awareness of the survival systems and we accept them as protection mechanisms, and we take care of the charged energy that is there protecting that memory. So with me taking care of that charged energy, I manage to find what is that memory about. Because I never knew. I had no clue that there was a memory of a 2-year-old being put on a diet and having lost trust in everyone around her. I did not know that. But with Ho'oponopono, because I was taking care of the charged energies in me, which were all the time making me feel like a victim, act like a victim, be a victim, and being totally overwhelmed with the world around me, feeling that the whole world was against me. You relate? You relate? Yes, I think so. The whole world is against me. Well, it is when you are a victim. When you are in victim mode, it is. But when you take care of that charged energy, at some point you start understanding why your go-to mechanism is victim mode, why your go-to mechanism is pleasing, why your go-to mechanism is arrogance, why your go-to mechanism is overwhelm, why your go-to mechanism is procrastination, imposter syndrome, or whichever mechanism that you have. You start understanding and you start taking care of that charged energy. And you will see from there, life is changing. Doesn't mean it changes from one moment to the other, but life is changing. So this is Ho'oponopono in a nutshell. When I'm talking about taking responsibility, I am taking responsibility of that charged energy protecting that memory. And with that, I am taking care of the memory, I'm taking care of the charged energy, I'm taking care of my survival mechanisms, and I am stepping out of my victim. I am stepping out of pleasing. I'm stepping out of overwhelm, because I now can take consciously a choice. I can make that choice consciously. But before I could not. You see? That is the big difference. So sometimes as Ho'oponopono is known as a forgiveness ritual, sometimes it is, and in that journey, a lot of the time, it was necessary for me to forgive myself for what I have done to myself, to my body, to my mind, to my survival mechanisms, because I was judging all of that, to my inner children, but also to the outside world. But I was always forgiving me. And I never forgave someone in the outside world. It was not necessary. Because the outside world was only the mirror that I needed to find what is really happening inside of me. Because I'm part of the outside world. And the outside world is part of me too. So the way that I look at the outside world comes from my perspective of me. Which is why my perception of the outside world is so totally different from the perception of my boyfriend. Because he has totally different projections of himself and the outside world than I have. I hope this has given you something that you can relate to, that you feel like you can work on, and that you feel like, oh, but this means I can also make the choice to step out of any mechanism, because you can. You can step out of it. Where there's a will, there's a way. Is that how you say it in English? I'm not sure. I'm translating from my own language. Where there's a will, there's a way. Go and find your way out of your mess. Doesn't mean that you have to be a healed person, but it does mean that you can be a person that is more appreciative of yourself, more loving towards yourself. And with that, you will be more loving to the outside world. But your first and most important point of attraction has to be you. You taking care of you. Sending you much love. Bye-bye. Thank you so much for watching. Thank you, beautiful soul. If there's anything I want you to take from these videos, then it is the permission for you to shine your light. It's the most important thing. So go ahead, shine your light. I love you. Bye-bye.